Let's look at the solo practitioner. Where do you see some of the biggest deficits when you're looking at a solo law practitioner when it comes to marketing? I mean, it's got to be all over the spectrum, but when they call you, what is one of their top needs?
Cutting through the clutter is really what they're looking for. The solo practitioner these days is being hit in so many different directions. They're getting emails daily from SEO vendors, from lawyer directories online. Yellow Pages are still knocking on their door.
That's amazing, huh?
And so really, of all the different marketing channels they have available, helping them to assess what's the best route, as well as what fits for your practice. If you're a solo personal injury attorney, that's a different thing entirely from a solo corporate attorney. You've got two different audiences that have different means of communication. They live in different places, so to speak,
Right.
and so the marketing channels that work for one don't work for the other.
But sometimes do you need to take a step back and actually look at their business systems before you even get to dealing with the marketing? Have you had to do that?
Yeah, I try to stay out of the management consulting game.
Okay.
But there are a lot of things that kind of weave together there. Look, we call it CRM, right? And in big companies, you got Salesforce.com. Well, if you're a solo, it could be a bunch of sticky notes on the wall, or
God
cocktail
forbid,
napkins.
I hope not, but it could be.
It could be, and so we have to be very adaptable to whatever systems or lack thereof are in place when we happen upon a client. And so how are they set up to manage all these contacts and develop contacts, and how's that information, and what do you do with that? A lot of times we'll talk to an attorney and we say, well, that client that you didn't get or that you didn't take on, what did you do with their information? Well, I didn't do anything with it. Well, that's valuable. That's valuable marketing data.
Right.
And you can still market to that person even though you couldn't help them at one time. Maybe you can help them later. And so that's part of the whole process too.
When you, and let's take this to more of the bigger or group office or the bigger office, what are some of their key points where they're asking you for help? What are some of the key areas that they like to get help in?
I think, and it's certainly present in the smaller firms and the solos as well, but storytelling is really important for any organization, but particularly in larger law firms. A lot of them are reasonably focused on their institutional brand, but their practice groups, their industry groups, their individual lawyers have stories to tell too. I love that.
Oh, I do
love
too.
That. I talk a lot about personal branding, which is a big buzzword. Basically what it comes down to is, what do you want to be known and valued for? And I emphasize adverbs, right? If you practice corporate law, there's a lot of people that practice corporate law. If you work with startup companies, a lot of attorneys work with startup companies. But how do you approach those clients? What do you do? What's your manner? What's your method? And that's where you really start to get into the stories and how they help.
And yeah, I think that's a great area for you to work in. And I don't know do you have that as like a separate practice area of teaching them about the value of storytelling and helping them craft their stories?
I think I wouldn't call it a separate area. It kind of weaves its way through everything.
Through their bios and all that sort of thing?
Certainly bios, collateral materials, blogging. We help lawyers and law firms find their voices.
And get that blog strategy in place, which is really important, because until you know where you're going, it's really hard to plan the content out 12 months in advance.
Yeah. And lawyers are intimidated by social media as a rule. They don't know how it fits. There are ethical issues, all sorts of ethical issues with that. And we find that if we start with the blog can drive the social media strategy, and we can do so much with it. I'm a big fan of saying write once and publish multiple times.
Right.
If you can take that content in one place and leverage it in different channels, you can build awareness and cast a wider net. I talked about how we try to impress adverbs upon attorneys. I'd say our adjective to describe ourselves is we're incremental. We've been asked to come in and give comprehensive marketing strategy, proposals, and instead what's the one thing that's really causing you heartburn these
Right.
days? What's the one big pressing issue? Let's start with that, and let's
Right.
build our relationship with you that way. And you get to know us, and we get to know you, and we can build the relationship. And then we can get into the technology and all the other things. But let's break it down to that one thing that's really, really hindering your efforts. Newsletters are a great form of client and audience communication. They are also the bane of most lawyers' existences. It's, you know, if a law firm says we're going to commit to a quarterly newsletter, in the past it's always come up to the week before or sometimes the night before, oh, we got to write a newsletter. The approach that we take is, let's work on your blog and let's make your quarterly newsletter your blog's greatest hits. Or let's pick and choose from amongst those blog posts, and if we can, and we generally win this argument, let's take it online, let's do an electronic newsletter, because then we can drive people from the newsletter back to your website, which is where we want them to go anyway, to learn more about you and all the different services that you provide. So that's I think it's really important. Having said that, we all get a lot of stuff in our inboxes, so we try to make it meaningful. We're not writing case analyses anymore. We're writing stuff that should resonate with that law firm's audience, and so we help them to tell that story too.
And going along the lines of branding, which is, you know, image is a lot of it, and I know image consulting goes along a lot with personal branding. Do you ever help them with the presentation side, like the, you know, even face to face? Do you work with them on how they, like the interpersonal skills? And
that's
softening that
a
up?
huge part of the business development
It is,
training and
okay.
coaching.
So some role playing comes
Well,
into play.
you know,
Maybe.
I'll tell you, I've been asked by firms, you know, John, we want you to come in and work with these attorneys, and we want you to grow their books of business by 257% over the next 9 months. And it's a very short conversation. I don't want to have dollars be the major metric for me. Instead, it's skills-based, it's activity-based. Are you getting out of your office? Are you meeting people? And how are you doing that? Because it's not just cocktail parties and hockey games and golf. It can be a lot of different ways. So the interpersonal skills come into play in that regard. How are you going to resonate or connect with that person, build that rapport and that chemistry over time? So absolutely, big factor. And what's interesting is the flip side of this is you have to then help, particularly in larger firms, help leadership manage expectations of different personality types. Because if you've got the very, very fine but introverted attorney who is being coerced and cajoled to go out and work cocktail parties and receptions and whatever else, it's a lot of pressure, and I think both parties get disappointed. So what other things can we counsel and coach that individual to do to personally market himself or herself and develop business? There are other ways than I think the traditional extroverted marketing activities.
Could you tell us one piece of advice that you would love to give to entrepreneurs? Because you have basically had that entrepreneurial journey, and you're helping others kind of learn that, whether they're a solo or a large firm, practicing firm. What's your advice?
Jump.
Jump where?
Just
Jump out of law? Jump?
No, it's funny. I come to being an entrepreneur later in life. I mean, there's so much emphasis placed on young millennials and getting out there and embarking upon their entrepreneurial careers, and they don't have as many ties and responsibilities. But you can prepare a lot, and at some point you just have to jump. You have to get out there and talk it up and work through your business model and get your messaging out, and you can't do it by yourself. You just have to jump. You just have to get out there.